The offer was simple, and it was disgusting. Alpha Marcus leaned back in his carved oak chair, the firelight gleaming off the silver signet ring he toyed with. He was a wolf of decadent cruelty, and she was, in his eyes, nothing. Ilara knelt on the cold stone of his great hall, her stomach a hollow ache of starvation, her shiftless, packless body trembling not from the cold but from the humiliation. Her debt to the Red Fang pack, a debt she'd inherited for the crime of being born a rogue and found on their lands, was a crushing, inescapable weight. She was property. She'd scrubbed floors, mucked kennels, and taken beatings for 10 years, and the debt only ever grew. Now he offered an end to it. Wait, before the next revelation unfolds, if this mystery has already captivated you, let us know where you're following this story from. To ensure you don't miss unexpected claims, broken bonds, or awakenings under the moon, subscribe and stay close. Now, back to the scene. You understand the terms, girl. Marcus's voice was smooth, like oil slicking over sharp rocks. Your ledger, wiped clean. A full release of your indenture. You walk out of my gates a free woman. Ilara's throat was sandpaper. Freedom, she whispered. The word felt foreign, impossible. Freedom, he confirmed, smiling. The smile didn't touch his cold, calculating eyes. In exchange for a simple task, you will continue your new assignment as guard to the prisoner. And, at a time of my choosing, you will kiss him. A cold spike of dread pierced the fog of Ilara's hunger. Not him. Not the one in the lowest dungeon cell, the one the other guards called the untouchable or the feral king. She'd only been on that rotation for 3 days, assigned because she was expendable. The last guard who'd gotten too close, a burly warrior named Thom, had been thrown back by some unseen force, his arm blackened and smoking, his shifter healing struggling to close the unnatural burns. The prisoner was a monster, a creature of raw, volatile power, bound in silver that should have killed him, but only seemed to make him more furious. No one can get near him, she stammered, the words tearing at her raw throat. It's not possible. It's possible for you, Marcus said, and his gaze sharpened, becoming analytical. You were in his cell block for 6 hours. You delivered his sustenance. You are unharmed. Ilara hadn't understood it herself. She'd been terrified, sliding the metal bowl of gray slop through the slot. The air near his cell had felt thick, like a thunderstorm about to break, crackling with a power that made her teeth ache. The prisoner, Caden, she'd heard him called, had been a massive shape huddled in the darkness, wreathed in heavy silver chains that were bolted to the stone floor and walls. He'd looked up just once, and his eyes had been inhuman, glowing with a faint amber light, full of a pain so deep it was madness. But the energy hadn't lashed out at her. It had quieted. I just left the food, she whispered. I didn't go in. But you will, Marcus said, standing. He was a huge man, all muscle and dominance, the alpha of the most powerful pack in the territory. He walked over to her, grabbing a fistful of her thin, matted hair and yanking her head back. She winced, tears springing to her eyes, but made no sound. After 10 years, she knew sound was weakness, and weakness earned more pain. You will go into his cell. You will tend to him. And when I give the order, you will kiss that animal. Do you know why a kiss, Ilara? She shook her head, a tear escaping to trace a clean path through the grime on her cheek. Because it is the ultimate expression of dominance, Marcus purred, his breath hot on her face. To force an act of intimacy on a broken foe, it will shatter the last of his pride. And it will prove your ultimate loyalty to me. He let her go, shoving her back. She caught herself on her raw-boned hands. Or you can refuse, and your debt will be doubled. You will be assigned to the kennels for the rest of your short, miserable life, and I will find another way to break him. Your freedom, Alara, all for one simple kiss. He didn't need to say more. The kennels were a death sentence. The packhounds were half wild, and rogues were their favorite sport. She had seen what was left of the last rogue who displeased the alpha. I agree, she forced out. The words tasted like ash. I agree. Good girl. He tossed a small, hard loaf of bread onto the floor in front of her. It wasn't kindness. It was fuel. Now go. Your shift starts. Ilara snatched the bread, her entire body shaking, and scrambled out of the great hall, clutching the stale loaf as if it were a treasure. She shoved it into her mouth as she descended the winding stone steps into the dungeons, the dry crumbs scraping her throat. Freedom. It was a sun she'd never thought she'd see, and it was blocked by the most terrifying shadow in the Red Fang territory. The dungeons were cold, the air thick with the smell of mildew, despair, and the sharp, metallic tang of silver. Down here, the pack's power was muted, suppressed by the ancient stones and the sheer weight of misery. The lower levels were for special prisoners. The lowest level was for him. The two guards at the final checkpoint, Kyle and Bran, looked at her with a mixture of pity and contempt. They were pack-born, full shifters, and she was less than dirt. Back for more, Omega? Kyle sneered, using the derogatory term for a packless, shiftless wolf. The Alpha, he assigned me, permanently, Ilara said, trying to keep her voice steady. Bran, the older of the two, grunted. Alpha's lust is mind. That thing, he jerked his chin toward the heavy silver-banded door at the end of the corridor, doesn't need a guard. It needs an executioner. Stay clear of the bars, girl. We use the poles to push his food in. Don't let your hand get anywhere near the slot. Thom's arm is still wrong. I know, Ilara murmured. She walked past them, her worn leather boots making no sound on the damp stone. The corridor ended at the solid iron door. A small barred window was set at eye level, and a heavy food slot was at the bottom. The air here was different. It was electric. She could feel it on her skin, a static prickle that raised the hairs on her arms. It was the smell of ozone and old blood. She took a deep breath, forcing down the terror. Freedom. It became a mantra. Just do this. Get close. Wait for the order. Kiss him. Be free. It sounded like a fairy tale and a nightmare all at once. She peered through the barred window. The cell was large, but the shadows clung to it. He was there, in the back, a silhouette of broken nobility. The silver chains binding his wrists, ankles, and a heavy collar around his neck were thick as a man's arm. They were all anchored to the floor, giving him perhaps 6 feet of movement in any direction. He was huge, even slumped against the wall. His hair was long and matted with blood and filth. "Prisoner?" she called out, her voice a small, trembling thing. He didn't move. I have your food." She crouched by the slot, her hands shaking so badly she could barely unlatch it. She had a bucket of the same gray gruel and a wooden cup of water. She pushed them inside. He didn't stir. "Please," she whispered, more to herself than to him. "You have to eat." A low growl rumbled from the back of the cell. It wasn't just a sound, it was a vibration that she felt in her chest, rattling her bones. It was pure, feral warning. Go, away. She scrambled back, her heart hammering. She spent the next 8 hours sitting on a cold stone bench just outside the cell, listening to the drip of water, the scuttling of rats, and the occasional, terrible sound of a silver chain shifting against stone. He never touched the food. This became her life. 12 hours on, 12 hours off. She'd sit, she'd wait, she'd push the food through. He'd growl. Sometimes he'd stand and pace, a restless, caged storm of a man. He was tall, broader than any wolf she'd ever seen, and his movements, even chained, were full of a terrible, restrained grace. Scars littered his body, pale lines against skin grimed with dirt, but it was the silver burns that were the worst. Angry, red-black welts at his wrists and ankles that never healed, constantly aggravated by the metal designed to poison their kind. On the 5th day, something changed. Ilara was so tired, so hungry, that she nodded off, slumping against the cold bars of the door. She awoke with a gasp, realizing she'd fallen, her arm partially through the food slot. She tried to yank it back, but her sleeve was snagged on a rough edge of the metal. Panic seized her. She was trapped. She pulled, fabric ripping, but she was stuck. "No, no," she whimpered, tears of sheer terror welling. And then she felt it, a presence. The crackling energy in the cell spiked, and a large, dark shape loomed on the other side of the door. She saw him crouch, his amber eyes burning in the gloom. He was looking at her arm, trapped in his space. He reached out. Ilara screamed, a thin, terrified sound. She shut her eyes, bracing for the burning pain, for the end. Freedom? What a joke. She was going to die here, in the dark, killed by a monster. A large, calloused hand closed around her forearm. It was shockingly warm. She waited. Nothing happened. There was no jolt of power, no searing agony, no smoke. There was just a hand, strong, rough, and solid. She opened her eyes. The prisoner, Caden, was inches from her, his face pressed against the slot. He was looking at his hand on her arm with an expression of profound, earth-shattering shock. He flexed his fingers, his thumb brushing her skin. Ilara had been packless all her life, but she was still part wolf. She was a dampener, a rare, recessive gene that made her shiftless but also rendered her immune to most active supernatural abilities. It was why she was useless, why she couldn't join the pack. And it was why she realized with dawning horror and wonder she could touch him. The volatile, uncontrolled aura of power that surrounded him, the aura that had burned Tom and kept everyone else at bay, simply stopped. It grounded on her skin, disappearing like lightning into the earth. He made a sound, a low, rough noise, not a growl, but something human. He gently, so gently, worked her sleeve free from the metal snag. He didn't let go. He just held her arm, his thumb stroking back and forth as if he hadn't touched another living being in 1,000 years. Ilara was frozen, not in fear, but in awe. His eyes, up close, weren't just feral. They were deep, intelligent, and filled with an agony she recognized. It was the agony of profound, absolute loneliness. "You..." His voice was a rasp, cracked from disuse. "You are not burned." "No," she whispered, her voice trembling. He finally let her go, and she pulled her arm back, her skin tingling where he'd held her. She stared at her own forearm, half expecting it to blacken and fall off, but it was just her, pale and thin. Caden sagged back against the wall, the chains rattling. He stared at his own hand. "What are you?" I'm Ilara. I'm... I'm your guard." He watched her for a long time, the silence stretching. He finally looked at the bowl of untouched food. Slowly, he reached for it. He ate. This was the true beginning. The next day, Ilara didn't just push the food through. She unlatched the heavy, silver-banded door. The other guards were on their break, far down the hall. She was terrified, but she knew, with a certainty that settled deep in her bones, that his power couldn't hurt her. She stepped inside. The cell was a nightmare. The stench of blood, waste, and despair was overwhelming. Caden shot to his feet, the chains yanking him short. He bared his teeth in a warning snarl, his body tensing, the raw power gathering around him like a shroud. "I won't hurt you," Ilara said, her voice shaking. She held up a small bucket of clean water and a rag she'd stolen from the laundry. The silver, I can't." He watched her, wary as she approached. The crackling energy in the air was so thick she could barely breathe. But as she got closer, it receded, like the tide pulling away from her. She stopped just out of his reach. "Let me," she whispered, "please." He stared at her, his amber eyes searching her face. He seemed to be looking for the trick, the lie. He found none. Slowly, agonizingly, he extended one arm, the heavy silver manacle at his wrist dripping with a dark, foul-smelling ooze. The skin beneath was raw meat. Her stomach turned. Freedom. She was doing this for freedom. But as she knelt in the filth and gently, so gently, touched the warm, clean rag to the edge of his wound, the mantra in her head changed. His entire body shuddered at her touch. A low groan escaped him, not of pain, but of a relief so profound it was its own kind of agony. "It stops," he choked out, his voice rough. "The burning. It stops when you touch me." "I know," she murmured, her hands shaking as she carefully cleaned the infected wound. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." She wasn't just doing this for freedom anymore. She was doing this for him. She came into his cell every day for the next 2 weeks. She brought him stolen food, not the gruel, but bread, cheese, and sometimes meat from the kitchens. She brought clean water. She cleaned his wounds. The silver still burned, but her touch, her dampener ability, gave him moments of relief. And his healing factor, suppressed for so long, began to slowly, sluggishly knit his flesh back together. And he began to talk. He wasn't the monster they said he was. He was Caden, alpha of the Shadowfen pack. Or he had been. His pack had been destroyed by Marcus in a brutal border war 5 years ago. Marcus had killed his mate, his beta, and his family. Caden was the last. He was kept alive as a trophy, a symbol of Marcus' power, paraded in a silver cage during festivals. But his rage and grief had manifested as this volatile, uncontrolled power, an aura of pure, destructive energy that made him too dangerous to handle. So he'd been thrown in the dark. "They think I am feral," he said one night, his voice stronger, deeper. He was sitting against the wall, and Ilara was sitting just out of his reach, sharing a piece of an apple she'd smuggled. "I let them." "Why?" she asked, her voice hushed. "Because the animal is all I have left. The man died with my pack." His gaze was heavy, haunted. "But you don't feel the aura, do you?" "I don't know what I feel," she admitted. "It's quiet. When I'm near you, the air is quiet." "You are a null," he murmured, his eyes widening with a flicker of ancient knowledge. "A dampener. My grandmother spoke of them. The wolfless who can walk through a storm and not get wet. The ones who can silence an alpha's roar." He looked at her, his gaze so intense it felt like a physical touch. "They are sacred. And Marcus has you scrubbing his floors. I am packless, she said, the shame burning her. I have a debt. A debt, he scoffed, the sound a bitter rumble. There is no such thing as a debt for a life. There is only tyranny. He reached for her, his chains rattling. He stopped, his hand hovering. Ilara, why do you do this? Why do you risk coming in here? It's not just the guards. If Marcus finds out. Ilara's blood ran cold. The bargain, the kiss, she had almost forgotten. In the quiet darkness of the cell, tending to this broken, powerful man, the price of her freedom had become a poisoned secret. She couldn't look at him. Ilara? He pressed, his voice softer, but with an alpha's command lacing through it. She began, her voice cracking. He promised me. Promised you what? She finally looked up, her eyes swimming with tears she refused to let fall. My freedom! Hell wipe my ledger! I can leave this place! I'll be free! Caden's expression didn't change, but a new, terrible coldness entered his eyes. He doesn't give such gifts. What is his price? I have to. She couldn't say it. What? He demanded, his voice rising, the feral edge returning. I have to kiss you, she cried, the words tumbling out in a rush of shame and despair. He wants me to prove I can get close. He wants to break you. It's a test. And he's going to make me do it. And in return, I get to go free. The silence that fell in the cell was heavier and more terrible than any chain. Caden stared at her. The warmth that had been growing between them, the fragile trust, the shared humanity, it all evaporated. The temperature in the cell dropped. The air began to prickle again, even on her skin. He pulled his arm back, shuffling away from her until his chains yanked taut, putting as much distance between them as the cell allowed. His face, which had slowly regained its humanity, its aristocratic planes and strong jaw, twisted into a mask of pure, cold fury. So, that's what this was, he whispered, his voice lethally quiet. All of it. The food, the water, your touch. He looked at his own healing wrist, disgusted. You weren't healing me. You were taming me, gentling the beast so you could perform your trick for your master. No! Ilara cried, scrambling forward. No, Caden, it wasn't. It started that way, but it changed. I didn't. Liar! He roared, and this time the power in the cell exploded. It didn't burn her, her dampener ability held, but the force of it, a concussive blast of pure rage, threw her backward. She slammed into the cell door, her head cracking against the iron. You are just like him, Caden snarled, advancing on her, his amber eyes blazing with white-hot hatred. He was the monster again. He was the feral king. You are a maggot, feeding on my pain, a tool, a spy. Please, she sobbed, holding up a hand, her vision swimming. Please, it's not true. Get it over with then, he spat, grabbing the bars of the door, his knuckles white. Get your freedom. Do it. Kiss me. No, not like this. Do it. His roar echoed up the stone corridor. Footsteps pounded down the stairs, the other guards, and a heavier tread. Well, well, Alpha Marcus's voice boomed from the corridor. He appeared at the cell door, flanked by Kale and Bran, his face alight with cruel satisfaction. It seems the little mouse has finally cornered the lion. What a delightful display of dramatics. Ilara's blood turned to ice. Alpha, heard every word, my dear, Marcus purred. Through the speaking tube, a wonderful invention. gentling the beast. I rather liked that. But it seems the beast is still quite feral. He looked at Caden, his smile widening. She told you the bargain, did she? Good. It saves me the trouble. Now, Elara, fulfill your end of the deal. Kiss him. Kiss the monster. And your debt is paid. Kale and Bran unbarred the door, their faces pale with fear of Caden, but more so of their alpha. "No," Elara whispered, her entire body shaking. "I won't." "You won't?" Marcus's smile vanished. "You agreed. A bargain was struck. It was wrong. I won't use him like that. I won't." She got to her feet, wiping the blood from the back of her head, and stood between Caden and the open door. It was a pathetic defense, but it was all she had. "I see," Marcus said softly. "You've developed an attachment. How inconvenient. Or perhaps—" His eyes narrowed, and a new, terrible understanding dawned on his face. He looked from her to Caden. "You're a dampener, of course. That's why he's stable. That's why he hasn't killed you. He can't." Marcus began to laugh, a low, ugly sound. "Oh, you stupid girl. You worthless, stupid girl. Freedom? You think I'd let freedom walk out of my gates? You're not a guard. You're a key. You're the key to controlling him. The bargain is void. You're far too valuable to be free." He nodded to his guards. "Seize her." Kale and Bran lunged, their relief at not having to touch Caden palpable. They grabbed Elara's arms, their fingers biting into her thin biceps. "No!" she screamed, struggling, but she was hopelessly outmatched. "And now," Marcus said, drawing a long, silver-edged knife from his belt, "we'll see how our pet lion reacts when we begin to hurt his little mouse." He advanced on her, the knife gleaming. Elara shut her eyes, bracing for the pain. A sound ripped through the dungeon. It was not a roar. It was not a growl. It was the sound of reality tearing. It was the sound of 5 years of agony, grief, and rage, held back by silver and despair, finally breaking free. Clang, screech, boom. Kale and Bran were ripped away from Elara, thrown like dolls against the far wall. Marcus stumbled back, his eyes wide with shock. Caden was free. He stood in the center of the cell, his chest heaving. The heavy collar was snapped, hanging from one of the broken bolts. The manacles at his wrists were still attached, but the chains connecting them to the floor were shattered, the stone anchors ripped out of the ground. His power, no longer chained, no longer volatile, but focused by his rage, radiated from him in visible, shimmering waves. But it was still agony. The silver was still burning him. He was a walking inferno of pain. "Elara," he growled. She didn't hesitate. She ran to him. The moment her hands touched his chest, the shimmering aura vanished. The crackling sound stopped. His power, his rage, didn't disappear. It focused, grounding through her, stabilizing. He let out a shuddering breath, the smell of ozone fading, replaced by the scent of pine and winter snow, the scent of alpha. "You touched me," he rasped, his eyes blazing, but the feral madness was gone. It was replaced by a terrible, cold clarity. "Always," she whispered, her hands flat on his chest, her head bowed. "Mine," he snarled. It wasn't a claim of ownership. It was a statement of fact, a declaration of protection. "Kill them both!" Marcus roared, recovering his nerve. "He's unchained! Sound the alarm!" Bran, recovering, raised a horn to his lips, but Caden was already moving. He was a blur. He crossed the cell in a single bound, the broken chains at his wrists whistling. He seized Bran by the throat, his other hand, the one Alara wasn't touching, grabbing Kyle. Alara was pulled with him, a dizzying, terrifying anchor. She was his shield. As long as she was touching him, his own power wasn't tearing him apart, and the Silver's poison was held at bay. But it also worked on others. When Kyle, a full shifter, tried to bare his fangs, tried to let his wolf rise, he found nothing. Ilara's dampener field, amplified by Caden's alpha power, was nullifying everything around them. I can't," Kyle whimpered, his claws receding, his strength fading. Caden didn't hesitate. He was an alpha at war. He snapped Kyle's neck with one brutal twist. He threw Bran's body at the advancing guards who were pouring down the stairs, scattering them. "To me!" Caden commanded Alara, pulling her tight against his back, his arm looping around her waist. "Hold on. Do not let go." "Where are we going?" she gasped, clinging to him, her face pressed against his scarred, filthy tunic. "Out," he said, and they ran. It was a nightmare of blood and chaos. Caden was a force of nature, a whirlwind of restrained power. He was still weak from years of starvation, his muscles atrophied, the silver still burning him. But with Alara as his anchor, his pain was manageable and his power was a scalpel. Guards swarmed them. "He can't shift," one yelled. "He's weak." Caden grabbed the guard and Alara's field hit him. The guard's enhanced strength vanished. Caden threw him into a stone wall with enough force to crack it. They fought their way up the dungeon stairs, a single, two-backed creature of impossible contrasts. He was the rage, she was the quiet. He was the storm, she was the eye. Marcus was ahead of them, waiting in the entrance hall, flanked by his 5 elite beta guard, all fully shifted into their massive 9-foot-tall wolf forms. They were creatures of nightmare, all teeth and claws and red eyes. "You will not leave this hall, beast," Marcus snarled, his own form wavering as his wolf pushed to the surface. "And the dampener is mine." Caden stumbled, his legs buckling. The years of torment were catching up. He was bleeding from a dozen new wounds, silver-tipped arrows and knives that had gotten past his defense. "Caden!" Ilara cried, feeling his strength fail. "Run, Ilara," he gasped, pushing her away from him. "He wants you. Run. You're free. Go." She looked at him, this magnificent, broken man, offering her the one thing she had craved her entire life: freedom. The gates of the stronghold were just behind Marcus, open to the night air. She could be gone. She looked at Marcus, his face twisted in a mask of possessive, furious greed. She looked back at Caden, who was preparing to die for her. "No," she said. Her voice was small, but it cut through the snarling of the wolves. Caden stared at her, his amber eyes wide. "I am not leaving you," she said, and she stepped in front of him. She, Ilara, the packless, the shiftless, the Omega Mouse, stood between a dying alpha and 5 of the most dangerous shifters on the continent. "What a touching, idiotic suicide," Marcus sneered. "Seize her and kill him. Slowly." The beta wolves lunged. Ilara didn't scream. She did the only thing she could. She reached back, grabbed the front of Caden's tunic, and pulled him to her. She rose on her toes, her heart a trip hammer of terror and a strange, new, fierce strength. She kissed him. It wasn't the kiss of the bargain. It wasn't for freedom or for a cruel alpha's test. It was salt and blood and desperation. It was a choice. It was a claim. The moment their lips met, something snapped into place. It was a shock, a jolt of energy so powerful it lit up the room. A faint, silver crescent moon, the mark of the Shadowfen Alpha, bloomed on her throat, a ghostly, glowing tattoo. A mate bond. And for Caden, it was like a lightning strike to a dead heart. The bond, her dampener ability, and her sheer, selfless will combined. The silver burns on his skin sizzled, smoked, and then healed. The silver manacles at his wrists didn't just break, they disintegrated, turning to dust. His power no longer just stabilized, but ignited, roared back to life. He stood up to his full height, his wounds knitting closed, his muscles swelling with the full, unbridled power of a true bonded alpha. He pulled Ilara behind him, his arm a steel bar around her waist. "Mine," he roared, and this time it was not a plea. It was a judgment. The beta wolves, seeing this, hesitated. This was not the broken prisoner. This was an alpha in his prime, bonded and furious. "Kill him!" Marcus shrieked, his own courage failing. Caden didn't give them the chance. He moved. The fight wasn't a fight. It was a reckoning. With Ilara held tight, her nullifying field protecting them both, he was untouchable. He was faster, stronger, and smarter. He dismantled Marcus's elite guard in less than 30 seconds. A brutal, efficient storm of claws and fangs he hadn't been able to summon for 5 years. Soon, only Marcus was left. He stood trembling, his partial shift fading, his human form looking weak and pathetic. "Please," Marcus whimpered, falling to his knees. "Mercy! I'll give you anything." Caden advanced on him, Ilara still held close. He looked down at the alpha who had taken everything from him. He raised a hand, his claws extending, ready to end the monster who had tormented him. "Caden," Ilara whispered, her hand on his chest. "Wait." He looked at her, his eyes still glowing, but the bloodlust dimmed at her voice. "Not like this," she said. His way is death. Let our way be life. Let's just go." Caden looked at Marcus, then at the open doors, then at the woman in his arms, the woman who had saved him, his mate. He let out a long, shuddering breath, the rage receding. He let his claws retract. "You are not worth the blood on my hands," he snarled at Marcus. "You are nothing. You will live with what you are," he snarled at Marcus. He turned his back on the broken alpha, and, holding his mate in his arms, Caden walked out of the Red Fang stronghold. He didn't run, he walked, and no one dared to follow. They didn't stop for miles, moving through the deep forest under the light of a full moon. Caden's strength was returning with every step, the bond feeding him, healing him, making him whole. Ilara, exhausted, was carried in his arms, her head resting on his shoulder, breathing in his scent of pine and snow. He finally stopped at a small, clear stream, hidden in a glade of ancient willow trees. He set her down gently, as if she were made of glass. For a long moment, they just stared at each other. He was no longer the prisoner. He was magnificent. His long hair was matted, his clothes were rags, but he was every inch the Alpha King. He reached out and touched the glowing silver mark on her throat. It was fading, sinking into her skin, becoming a permanent, beautiful tattoo. "You're my mate," he said, his voice raw with wonder. I think so," Ilara whispered, her hand rising to cover his. "You saved me," he said. "You stood in front of them. You offered me freedom," she replied, her voice thick. "You were willing to die for me to have it." "Freedom," he murmured. He looked around the glade, at the moonlit trees, at the free-flowing water. "This is freedom. Not a ledger, not a gate. This." He looked back at her. "I have nothing, Elara. My pack is gone. My lands are... I don't even know. I am just a man with nothing but scars." Elara looked at this man, the one no one could touch, the one she had kissed, not for a bargain, but for a bond. She thought of her life, a life of cold floors, hard bread, and harder fists. A life of being untouched, unseen, and unchosen. "You're wrong," she said, her voice finding a new, steady strength she'd never known she possessed. "You're not nothing, and I'm not a mouse." He smiled, a true, real smile that transformed his harsh face, making him devastatingly handsome. "No, you are not. You are my alpha mate. You are my savior. You are everything." He leaned down, his forehead resting against hers. "The bargain was for one kiss," he whispered, his breath warm on her lips. He wanted it to be an ending, a humiliation. "It wasn't," she whispered back. "No," he agreed. He tilted his head, his lips brushing hers, a promise, not a price. It was a beginning. And this time, in the safety of the moonlight, Caden, the alpha of Shadowfen, kissed Elara, his mate, his equal. It was not for freedom, or for a bargain, or for escape. It was a promise of a new life, a new pack, built not on debt, but on a love born in the deepest darkness. He had been the prisoner no one could touch, and she had been the guard who held the key, not to his cell, but to his soul.